What is up guys, Weevil YouTuber here, back with another video. And today we're going to be talking about side decking. I'm not talking about side decking in specific decks, but I'm talking about side decking in general. So let's get into it. Okay, so we all know that side decking is a complicated enough process. Typically it involves predicting what your opponent is going to be using, countering your opponent's strategies, while also not compromising your own. For me, I would think of side decking as being akin to fashion, because things go in and out of fashion just like popular decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Go in and out of fashion. It is not always based on whether a deck is good or not. It is sometimes based on whether the deck is popular and what everybody is using. And in fact, the fact that everybody will be using a deck will increase the probability of it doing well. And that is, for me, what the crux of the matter is regarding side decking. Okay, so we've already spoken about the classic, original type of side decking, which is simply to counter an opponent's strategy while not compromising your own. But there was also a kind of meta side decking, a kind of counter side decking, where your opponent will side something against you, and you in turn will side something against what they have sided. Most people call this counter siding. And you may ask yourself why you would waste precious space filling up your side deck with cards that only countered what other people would side against you. Well, the reason is, one, decks that are vulnerable to single sides can always predict what people will side against them. And two, those decks are often so reliant on their strategy working that if it doesn't work, the deck becomes so horribly inconsistent that, if their sides fail, then the deck fails. That is simply the way it usually is in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that is often the reason why decks like Dark Worlds have never topped at events consistently, because they were always so vulnerable to a single side, which, if drawn first by the opponent, would almost always ensure their victory. Okay, so it's pretty easy to play guessing games with one another regarding what one another will side against each other. When it's bang smack in the middle of a format, that is fine. You know Inzectors are well established, and you know Dino Rabbit is doing well, and you know Chaos Dragons are derping all over the format, etc. And so you know the decks that are topping, you know what to side against them, and so forth. But after a ban list, I mean right after a ban list, in the first few YCS events and the first few regionals that we get our eyes on, within the first 2 weeks of the format, perhaps within the first month of the format, a grace period if you will, it's essentially open. Nobody knows really what's going to end up popular. And what people expect will be popular is in fact what becomes popular. For example, somebody has no clue, they go to YCS Toronto, they don't know what's going to be there, they don't know what's going to top, what's going to be popular, or anything. But they assume that Girgiz will, make a stretch and will be in the top 4 or whatever, as it turns out that they were. So that's fine. So then this person will decide, I'm going to side System Downs, or whatever, against Girgiz. I don't know if they're going to be there, but they could be there. So I'm going to decide against them. And then that person will go home to their friends and say, oh my god, Girgiz top 4. Girgiz are amazing. Everyone should use Girgiz. And then all their other friends are like, that's a great idea. I think I'll just build a Girgiz deck. This in turn feeds what the meta becomes. So if you understand my reasoning, by siding in against a deck which you're not sure is going to be popular yet, you're in fact generating popularity and notoriety about the deck by siding against it, even if the deck isn't in fact that good. Because I have always been of the opinion that popularity trumps quality all the time. You would see Rabbit decks, one person make a particular build of Rabbit that was popular. You would see those 2 guys with Chaos Dragons who topped at YCS Toulouse and that other YCS. Everyone would copy them. People might favour traps, for example, in Chaos Dragons, but they would copy the deck anyway. They would net deck it. They would become sheep. That would in turn determine what people would side against the deck, which would, of course, feed that whole side decking process once again. People would side cards against Chaos Dragons, a particular build of Chaos Dragons, for example. And then as a result, people would start building that build because they thought that it was the best possible build. Otherwise, why would people think that that particular type of deck was a threat, and why would they side against it in the first place? That is the logic that people go through over and over again in a circular process each format. And the only difference at the beginning of a format is it's only based on anticipation and it's not based on prior knowledge. But within a week or 2 of this process kind of circling around, people saying, I think people are going to run this, therefore I think this is a threat, therefore this deck must be good, therefore I'm going to build this deck and prove everybody wrong, and think of loads of counter sides against what people are siding, and so forth, and yada yada yada. As a result of that process, the meta establishes itself very quickly, usually within the space of about a month. So that is basically my logic behind side decking. Well, because side decking is pretty much like a fashion trend, there is typically no right or wrong answer as to what you can side against a deck, But what I will say is, don't side with everybody else is siding if you can help it. Just because everyone else is siding it does not mean that it is the best possible side against the deck. And just because everyone is siding against a particular deck, such as Girgis or Chaos Dragons or whatever, does not mean that deck is just a god deck and it's never going to lose and that it's really, really popular. In fact, it may in fact mean that it's popular, but it may not mean that it's really, really good. So my advice to people when they're siding in this format, and in any format in general, really, is always think about what you would most naturally side against. Always focus on what's in your meta, not on what you assume will be popular and what people will all try and build. Always assume that your meta is kind of the center of your universe, and if you're going to a big event, then you need to think big, okay? Then you need to assume that the sheep will arrive, and that they will all be using the tier 1 decks. Because these are the decks that win. These are the decks that have established themselves. But what people seem to forget is that it is always down to the individual player. For example, Girgis may have top forward in YCS Toronto only because of how good the player was. In another person's hands, that deck with like its heavy 15, 16 traps or whatever it had may not have done nearly as well. So that is something you have to consider. So my final advice for side decking is try and be creative with it. Try and think of a side that no one else has used before, because then you'll toss the meta off of its little kind of spinning wheel thing where people will side and then they'll counter side against that and that and that and so forth. But if you have predictable sides all the time, the wheel will remain fairly constant. Nothing will ever change, really. Whereas if you change something up, if you think of a different side, you may cause people to ask questions. And then you might think to yourself, well, how could I, ever think of a truly 100% creative side against a particular deck? When there's so many thousands of people who are trying to do the exact same thing in the world. And you could say the result of this process of thousands of people posting on forums and posting up deck lists and going to YCS events and so forth causes us to believe that Snowman Eater or whatever is the best possible side against a particular deck because so many other people have said so. But there's always room for people to be creative, and for that reason you should never really give up on trying to think of creative sides against decks. But anyway guys, I'm going to leave the video there. Thank you so much for watching as always. The reason I'm talking about side decking is basically because it's a new format now. It got me thinking about how the phenomenon of side decking is particularly interesting based on all these ideas of popularity versus quality, individual skill, siding versus counter-siding, and how that in turn generates the meta. That is basically what I find the most interesting about side decking. So anyway guys, any comments you have about this video, please let me know. Comment, rate, subscribe. As always, all of your comments are very much appreciated. And I do try and reply to all of them, although I'm getting more and more these days because I have so many more. I have more videos each week, as you know. And so I can't really reply to all the comments, but I will certainly try to reply to them all. And yeah, I've got plenty more good videos coming up soon, including a kind of in-depth analysis of the Seal of Orichalcos. Possibly, in my opinion, the best field spell ever. Of course, it has its drawbacks, but I think that it will be extremely beneficial to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that a lot of decks which don't rely on XYZ summoning or using their extra deck will really, really enjoy this card. Anyway guys, I'm going to leave the video there. As I said, comment, rate, and subscribe. As always, I did promise a competition for you guys. I'm still thinking about what to put up in the competition. A lot of people now are suggesting to me Photon Strike Bouncer. I might indeed do that. But I really need more input from you guys. Also, I'm really busy lately, so I haven't really been able to kind of think up anything. But in any case, I will definitely try and get the competition up as soon as I can. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I will talk to you guys later. I am Yu-Gi-Tuber, and I am signing out. Peace.